Welcome to the first Sew Noob series episode. To start, I will be drafting and fitting this basic skirt block or sloper using my own measurements, as our bodies are not a copy and paste version of each other. By learning to draft your own patterns, you will gain an understanding of body proportions, which will enable you to customize items not only to your own aesthetic and style, but also your own body, resulting in more comfortable clothes. To start, you will need the following: a tape measure and string to take the necessary measurements, a sharp pencil and eraser, or even better, a clutch pencil, to work as precisely as possible, as even a millimeter can have an effect on your finished pattern, brown pattern paper for drafting and adjusting your pattern, brown pattern cardboard, as it is always a good idea to transfer your basic blocks onto cardboard. This is a sturdier material for frequent and prolonged use. Remember, your basic block will be the foundation to all your garment designs. A 1 meter drafting ruler, a grid ruler. Unfortunately, my grid ruler is marked in inches and not centimeters, although it still simplifies the drafting process for me. A French curve to draw in the hip curve and slightly curved waistline. A tracing wheel just to make sure our hip curves are aligned and to transfer our final pattern onto the brown pattern cardboard. A felter pen or marker to outline our final pattern for future reference after making all the necessary adjustments. Some calico and thread to make up a toile to check fit and make the necessary adjustments to ensure a good fitting basic block. And some spun bond to trace and cut the pattern for the toile. I've also included a few other items that I used in the process, such as an unpicker, nippers, sewing gauge and pins. A few tools used in pattern drafting that can make the process easier include a notcher and an awl. So if you have any of those lying around, you can use them on your final cardboard pattern. The basic skirt block or sloper is an easy pattern to draft, especially for first-time drafters. The version I will be drafting only has 2 darts in the front and 2 darts at the back. By adding more darts, you will be able to shape the skirt for an even better fit. The measurements you will need to successfully draft your own basic skirt block are the waist, hip, waist to hip, and waist to knee measurements. The reason why I'm working with the waist to knee measurement for my skirt length is because it makes it easier when needing to lengthen or shorten the skirt, as some skirt design styles also make use of this measurement during manipulation, such as the mermaid and waterfall skirt. To take exact measurements, stand with your bare feet approximately 10 centimeters apart. Do not pull in your belly or hold your breath. You must maintain your natural posture. Look straight ahead of you. Don't take your measurements too exact or tight. The measuring tape must sit comfortably in its position. Use a string to indicate your natural waistline. Put the string around your smallest section and move around a bit for it to settle. This will be your natural waistline. For the hip measurement, you will take your measurement around the widest part of your hip, over your bum. Next, measure your waist to hip, which will indicate your hip depth. Lastly, measure your waist to knee, or whichever skirt length you would prefer on your basic block. Again, I measured mine to the knee, as it adds to the ease of lengthening, shortening, or manipulating the basic block into other design styles. To start your basic block, there are a few calculations that you will need to do. I find it easier to do these calculations before I start with my block, since this gives me the opportunity to double check, and it also makes the drafting process a bit easier, as you can be sure that you will not forget any measurements or make any silly mistakes, which is something I'm prone to doing as I become impatient to finish my block. I built a basic skirt block calculator, which I will also link in the description below. You are welcome to download this calculator for use when drafting your own basic block. I use Google Sheets for the calculator, but you will be able to download this as an Excel spreadsheet or make a copy to your own Google Drive. If you use the calculator provided, you will only need to enter your own measurements and preferred ease into the yellow blocks, with all calculations being done for you. You will also see that there is a key which indicates that all yellow blocks are to be filled in, so these will be your own measurements and own wearing ease preferences. All quarter measurements are displayed in the purple blocks. With all calculated measurements, you will need to draft your skirt with in blue. So let's have a look at the calculations you will need for your basic skirt block. I also included notes on how the calculations were done. If you hover over a cell, you will see the note. If you click on a cell, you will be able to see the calculation in the formula bar, and you will see in the headings there are usually a bit more descriptive information on that specific section. First, you will see the body areas that were measured to be able to draft our skirt, which included the waist, hip, waist to hip, and lastly the waist to knee measurement. I will now capture my own measurements into the yellow blocks, and then we will have a quick look at the calculations. The measurements I captured are my full measurements, thus the circumference of my waist and hips, as well as the full waist to hip and waist to knee measurements. In the purple blocks, next to the full measurements, you will see the calculations changing to the quarter measurements for each body area where horizontal measurements were taken. The reason for this is that you will simultaneously only be drafting half of the front block and half of the back block of the skirt. Next, wearing ease is added to the basic block to ensure that there is sufficient space to comfortably move around or make non-restrictive movements in the block. This includes moving your arms, bending and breathing comfortably. Although there is no exact number here, you want the fit to be quite true to your own size, as this is a sloper that you will later use to manipulate into different patterns. On the waist, ease usually ranges between 1 to 4 centimeters, and on the hips 4 to 10 centimeters. For my skirt, I've decided on 1 centimeter ease around the waist and 4 centimeter ease around the hips. Once again, this is a full ease measurement with 1 centimeter and 4 centimeters being added to the circumference of the pattern. Therefore, the quarter ease is again calculated within the purple block. Now for the actual measurements that you will be using to draft your half front and half back blocks. These are all the measurements shown in the blue blocks. For all horizontal measurements, for example the waist and hip, quarter calculations are used, with all vertical measurements remaining equal to the full measurements taken. After entering your own measurements into the calculator, it is time to start drafting your basic skirt block. Remember, all measurements in the blue blocks will be used to draft your patterns. I will be demonstrating the method I used by drafting a quarter scale block. First, fold your drafting paper in half and mark in this line. This will be your joint side seam. Next, add a horizontal line at the top, which will be the waistline. Measure out your waist to knee length and square out. Then, measure your waist to hip length to draft in the hip line. From the joint side seam, measure out your hip calculation to add in your center front and center back lines. Mark in your waist calculation by measuring from the center front and center back lines respectively. Lift the center front line with 0.5 centimeters on the waist, as our backs are generally more hollow than our fronts. Also lift the joint side seam with 1.5 centimeters and mark in a short line that runs parallel to the waistline. This will ensure a smooth fit around the rounding of your body's circumference. Now, measure and mark in 1.5 centimeters from the center front and center back, which will also contribute to a smoother fit around the body. The next step is to add the darts. Measure out your dart position from your center front and center back lines and mark in. From the dart position, measure out your dart width and mark in. Also mark in the midpoint of each dart. Measure out your dart length from the midpoint of each dart and square down. Once you have marked the middle of your dart, extend the dart legs to the waist, according to their respective dart widths. Also mark in the length of your back dart on the joint side seam. You will be using this marking later when adding your hip curve. Last but not least, we have to do the waist shaping, to be able to add the hip curve and finish off the waistline. For this basic skirt block, the amount of excess that is added back to the waist will be equal to the dart width. Extend your new waist measurement to the lifted joint side seam above the waist. On the front panel, connect the waist to the back dart length mark you made on the joint side seam. Fold your pattern paper in half on the joint side seam and transfer the hip curve to the back panel with your tracing wheel. This will ensure a balanced side seam to make sure the hip curves follow the same shaping. Unfold and use your French curve to complete the opposite hip curve by again connecting the lifted waistline to the back dart length marking on your joint side seam. Fold your darts towards your center front and center back. Extend the lifted side seam to the 1.5 cm markings you made earlier with a slight curve. Use a tracing wheel to balance the line over the darts and reshape. To finish off your draft, add the necessary pattern markings such as grain lines, notches, cut information and zip length. Pattern information includes the pattern name, panel name, number of pieces to cut and pattern size. Note that I also include that no seam allowance has been added to the pattern, as this will be our master pattern, which will not be cut out, but can be used as a base for other styles. Now to draft my own basic skirt block. I started by folding my paper in half and marking in the joint side seam, as I will be drafting half of the front and half of the back block of the skirt simultaneously. I added in a horizontal line at the top, which will be my waistline. I measured out my waist to knee length and drafted in my knee line. I also measured out my waist to hip length and added in my hip line. I used my calculated hip measurement to determine my center front and center back lines, which extended from my waist to knee. I marked in my calculated waist measurement, which I measured out from the center front and center back respectively. I lifted the waistline of my center front with 0.5 centimeters. I also lifted the joint side seam line with 1.5 centimeters and measured out 1.5 centimeters from both the center front and center back to ensure a smooth fit around the circumference of my body. Next, I marked in my calculated dart position, again measured from center front and center back. I also marked in my calculated dart width. I determined the midpoint of each dart before measuring down my calculated dart lengths. Remember to also mark in your back dart length on the joint side seam. Next, I extended the dart legs from my dart point to the waistline. Waist shaping was next. Where I drafted in the hip curve by using my French curve. I used my tracing wheel to transfer the curve to the other side to ensure a smooth fit. Lastly, I had to draft in my waistline. To do this, I folded my darts and connected my raised side seams to the center front and center back with my French curve. Again, I used my tracing wheel to balance the line over the dart to be able to reshape the waistline if necessary. To finish off my draft, I added the necessary pattern markings, such as center front, center back, cut information, grain lines, notches, darts and my zip length. Pattern info included the pattern name, panel name, pattern size, number of pieces to cut and that no seam allowance was included. Although the pattern was drafted according to my own measurements, all bodies have their own unique curves, So to ensure a good fitting custom basic block to use as a foundation for further designs, I now need to fit my basic skirt pattern. I'm using spunbond to copy my pattern, since you should never cut your master pattern, as you can always go back and use this to make any alterations as your body changes. Now pin your pattern to the calico. Remember, I did not add any seam allowances, so I will be adding a 1 cm seam allowance to the side seams only, as well as the center back, as this is only a sample for fitting. I will also not be inserting a waistband or hem, as I want to make sure that the natural waistline and knee length is correct. Next, I marked in my darts by using pins as a guide. Remember to once again transfer all pattern markings, including the hip line and darts, as this is important when checking fit. At long last, it was almost time to sew, but not before pinning all the pieces. I then sewed, and ironed until my toile was complete. At long last, it was time to fit. I was quite happy with the initial fit, and my hip and knee line was parallel to the floor. But, since we all have different body shapes and curves, I decided to shorten both the front and back darts quite a bit, as well as flatten my hip curve. To ensure a better fit, I will be making a few adjustments to my own pattern. I will be shortening my front dart with 3 cm and my back dart with 3.3 cm from my initial draft. This might seem excessive, but I need to follow my own body curves. Everyone's adjustments will also be different due to individual body shapes and sizes. As I'm shortening my back dart, I also have to lift the back dart length marking I made on the joint side seam. I have also decided to follow my front hip curve tracing exactly, which means that the excess added back to my waist will be equal to the front dart width for both the front and back panel. It is also a good idea to toile another sample for fit. When you are satisfied with your master pattern, use your tracing wheel to transfer your final pattern to some pattern cardboard, as you will be using this as the base to all your own designs. Congratulations on drafting a basic skirt block according to your own measurements. If this is your first time drafting or you found this video useful, let me know down in the comments below. Please also remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel.